We know how to get rid of sensor dust specks and how to do some basic retouching. Just remember that clicking and dragging where you can kind of not use a circle but use an odd shape is new in Photoshop CC. If you don't have CC, or you haven't updated CC to the newest version, you might not find that in there. You might have to just click and let go to work with circles. Do you remember before we stitched panoramas on one of the previous days? And when we were done stitching a panorama, we ended up with a picture that was not a rectangle. Instead, it had an unusual shape. And sometimes in the process of cropping, that became less than ideal because I had to get too close to some objects when I cropped them. Like when I had a really long panorama of Seattle, I might even crop off the top of the Space Needle because the rest of the panorama had an odd shape. So let me show you how you can fill in the empty parts of your panorama with something, with some material, so that you don't have to crop out as much of the picture. So let's take a look. The first thing I need to do is get all the empty areas in this picture selected. There are a bunch of different ways you could do that. One of them would be to use a tool called the Magic Wand tool. With the Magic Wand tool, you could click in the empty area, like in the upper left, and it's going to select from the point that I click at, it's going to spread out until it hits something that looks different than what I clicked on. And the difference is determined by this thing called tolerance. At least 32 brightness levels of difference, and then it's going to, when it hits something that's at least that many brightness levels different than what I click on, it will stop. Well, since this is all empty, all the checkerboard area in here contains nothing, which means it's consistent. Even though it looks like a checkerboard, checkerboard is just an indicator to say that it looks this way to make it easy to tell what is empty versus what might be white. So I'm going to click out there. The problem is now I have to click down here because it wasn't continuous. Didn't make it all the way down to here because the picture bumped in. Whenever you have a selection tool, if you just click, it's going to replace the selection you last had with a new one. If you want to add to it instead, you can either hold down the Shift key or you can click this little icon up here, which means whenever I use this tool, instead of creating a brand new selection, add to the one I already got. But holding down Shift does the same thing. So I could go over here and do this, and then I got to click up here again, and all that. But that was 3 or 4 or 5 clicks, and sometimes there are more areas where I might have to click about 10 times to get it. So I'm not actually going to use that technique, even though it might be the first thing you'd think of. I'm going to use a technique that will give me the selection I want with more precision and will do it very quickly. In my Layers panel, I'm going to move my mouse on top of the thumbnail for that layer. And there's a trick you can use. If you hold down the Command key on a Macintosh, that's Control in Windows, and click on this little thumbnail picture in your Layers panel. Before you click, the moment you hold down the Command key, you'll see a little kind of marquee icon appears on top. Well, if you Command click on that little thumbnail, anywhere within it, you're going to get a selection of everything that's in that layer. It's going to select everything that doesn't look like a checkerboard in that layer. That's what that does. It's a little trick. Command click on the thumbnail for the layer, that's Control clicking in Windows. It's just a weird trick that says select everything that doesn't look like a checkerboard. Okay? Now that's the exact opposite of what I want. I wanted the checkerboard area. So I'm going to go to the Select menu then, and there's a choice called Inverse, which gives you the opposite. And so I'll choose Inverse, and I have the opposite. So therefore I can do that even on a really complex panorama that's got a weird shape, and the Magic Wand tool might not be convenient to use, or I might miss a spot or something. Well, this isn't going to miss a spot. It's just thinking about, let's select everything that's in this layer, select Inverse, and therefore you got the empty parts. Okay? Now, just like with something that has a technology called healing, Whatever's on the edge of this, whatever this edge is touching, is what it's going to try to match the brightness of. And right now, that edge doesn't actually overlap the picture, and I need it to. I need the selection to overlap the picture just the tiniest bit. And so what I'm going to do next is go to the Select menu. There's a choice called Modify, and there's a choice called Expand. And what Expand will do is take my selection and just act as if it's a balloon full of air. And imagine you just added some extra air. What would happen? The balloon would get bigger, but it'd be the same shape. Well, same thing here. It's just going to make the selection larger, but retain the same shape. So if I choose Expand, all I need is 1 or 2 pixels. Click OK, and you won't be able to visually notice it, but that selection now encroaches into the picture by 1 pixel. Okay? If I typed in 10, it would have gone 10 pixels in, but we just don't need more than 1. Now, I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and I'm going to tell Photoshop to fill that empty area. And when I choose Fill, this comes up, and it needs to know what should we fill with. I don't want to fill with black. The default setting is actually a choice called Content Aware, but we used this the other day, and I changed it to black for some reason. We're going to run into a problem, which some people online right now is giggling about because they're thinking I'm going to mess up. And that is, there's a checkbox we also used yesterday, or the day before, yeah, yesterday, down here, called Preserve Transparency. I don't know if you remember when I used it. What it was is at the beginning of the day yesterday, we were talking about layers. I had a picture of, I think, a horse. I had painted around the edge of it with white paint, and I decided I wanted to change the color of the paint to black. Well, it was sitting on its own layer. I said, just fill the layer with black. And it filled the entire layer with black. So, oh man, I didn't want that. I wanted to only fill the parts that contain something. So I turned on something called Preserve Transparency, and that means preserve the checkerboard. Don't fill the checkerboard. Well, right now, the only thing we have selected is the checkerboard. So if that thing's turned on, this isn't going to work. So I'm going to turn that off. Does that make sense? Preserve transparency. The checkerboard is the transparency. So if we're going to preserve it and that's turned on, not going to work. So actually what I have right now are the default settings. If I had never used this feature before in my lifetime and I opened it, that's the settings it would have been at. I don't remember what version of Photoshop they added Content Aware Fill in. I'm guessing Photoshop CS5 or 6, just so you know, so if you have an old version. I'm going to click OK, and let's see. Cross your fingers at this point. It helps. Because sometimes it doesn't always do great, but most of the time you'll be amazed. Look at what it just did. I think that's nuts that they've come out with technology that does that. I mean, now it's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to get rid of my selection, deselect, and we can take a look. Just glancing at it, it ain't bad, but you want to be critical of it because if you're just going to post it on the internet, you'll probably be fine because it's usually pretty small and nobody zooms up on internet stuff. But if you're going to make a print and hang it on the wall, look close because it will have messed up. And all we need to do to fix it most of the time is just select smaller and smaller areas and repeat the process. Like this small area is messed up. Okay, we'll just select that small area and fill. And then there's another spot messed up. Select, fill. And so let's see if we can get away with that. Right here, this part to me looks like it kind of slowly blends from one color to the next where it should be more abrupt. And so I'm just going to select that. It won't always be able to fix it. Sometimes I have to do things manually, but I'm going to try a Content Aware Fill there. It did do something different. And you can apply it more than once. Like right now, I can just apply it again if I want. But I just look at that, and I get that actually looks better to me. It looks more like what should be there. This looks like weird, blurry material. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that's where it filled it in. Let me choose Undo a few times to check. Yeah, you see how that's how far out the selection was? So I can come over here and say, well, that part there does not look right. And fill, click OK. Wow. Completely different with what it picked. It looks more appropriate, but now this big chunk looks out of place. So I might just say, see if it can get rid of this. And now I have to go up here a lot and choose this. there are 2 different keyboard shortcuts that will get you in there. It lists one right here, which I don't use, Shift F5, because my F keys are assigned, like F5 on mine is going to change my keyboard's brightness, that kind of stuff. I don't like ones that use F keys. And there's a different keyboard shortcut that also brings you in there, and it's just Shift Delete. And to me that makes more sense, because I'm thinking of deleting something right now, deleting, like retouching out something. But Shift Delete will bring you into this dialog box, and then pressing Return is the same as clicking OK. So if you need to do this a lot, all you need to do is select an area, do Shift Delete, Return. So now this part down here is too bright, so select it, Shift Delete, Return, and you see how I can relatively quickly do some of this. This part up here looks odd. Shift Delete Return. But anyway, I'll just come over here. I'm not going to fix this whole thing because it's just a matter of time. I want to get on to things where I actually have to make decisions instead of relying on Photoshop. But I would go around wherever it looks weird. Shift Delete Return. And that looked a little odd here. Maybe I'll have it go all the way into there. Shift Delete Return. And see if I can get it to be more realistic. But what you'll find is this does an amazing job on skies, because skies and clouds are things that don't have such specific detail, exacting detail, where if you put a little bit of the wrong stuff in that it would look bad. And so for skies, it works great. And in panoramas, that's half of the problem in your panorama. It's the top of most panoramas is a sky. And then the bottom is where you might need to go through and do what I'm doing now. And wherever you have extremely exacting detail, like where a waterfall is, you're going to have to manually retouch that. But considering what's in a lot of these areas, it's not doing too bad, considering the amount of effort that was involved. Okay? But do be critical of it. And then afterwards, since it was a panorama, I would be cropping the picture, so I'm going to crop out some of that. So what you might want to do is do this technique where you fill it, and then before you go in and start fixing things, crop the picture. Because you usually crop a panorama a little bit anyway. Crop the picture and then only fix the parts that were left over, because otherwise you might end up fixing that corner in the lower right, and in the end it's not even in your picture. So why spend the time? Okay? You'll also need to use the same technique if you ever have architectural images. Like here are some, there's a church in Iceland and some turf homes or turf buildings. And notice that I tilted my camera up to include the top of this building. Can you tell I tilted? Because the top of the buildings looks smaller than the bottom. The sides of the buildings kind of doing that. Well, we can fix that. And if we go here to our tabs, that's under the Lens tab. I think we used it the other day. Under the choice called Profile, if you turn that on, that's going to fix bending of those lines. So if they're bent in or out, it'll fix it. And then under the tab called Manual, we had some icons. And collectively, those icons are known as a feature called Upright. The letter A stands for Auto. If I click on it, it does an okay job at getting those lines to be nice and straightly vertical. I can also try this icon over here, which only thinks about vertical lines. It doesn't care about horizontals, and see which one of those I like better. If I like Auto or I like this. There is a choice at the bottom, by the way, I don't think I mentioned before, called Show Grid. If you turn on Show Grid, then there's also a slider which controls how big the grid is. So if I get one of those grid lines to be near the edge of the building, where I can easily refer to it, then I could switch between Auto and the choice called Vertical and see which one I think looks better. And when it comes to the church out here, I like Auto better, because the vertical on the church looks like it's the same angle as the grid line, whereas when I click on the vertical one, that to me still looks tilted. It actually looks like it's overcompensated to me. It looks like it's going out. So I like the Auto in this particular case. So anyway, you're going to have this, and then usually the next step after using this is crop your picture, because you no longer have a rectangle. Well, if I come here and use the crop tool, and I crop out all of that checkerboard. Okay, I'm going to have to crop to there, and at the bottom, what am I going to do? I mean, I need to crop to here. Well, that's not what I want, right? So oftentimes, you're going to have to clear your crop, bring it over to Photoshop, and use the exact same technique we did with the panorama to fill in the empty parts. Does that make sense? So I can say Open Image. And what we did was we moved my mouse on top of the thumbnail image, my Layers panel. I held down the Command key, Control and Windows, which I currently have held down. I click on that thumbnail, and I get my selection. I need the opposite of that, so I go to the Select menu and choose Inverse. And then I need the selection to overlap the picture. Right now it like kisses the picture, it doesn't overlap. And so it's Select, Modify, Expand. Just one is fine, one or two. And then I went to the Edit menu and chose Fill. Remember, there's a keyboard shortcut for that. If you do it a lot, it's relatively easy to remember Shift-Delete, because I think of it, I need to delete something out of my picture or retouch something out, and just Shift-Delete brings it up. All you got to do is make sure that this says Content Aware. And if you see your coworker constantly doing this, turn this on when they're at lunch. It won't work for them anymore. And then you can come in the next lunch and turn it off, you know, because it remembers that setting's sticky. Although you don't have to do that to your coworkers. And it will do some filling, and it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but it's probably going to make any additional retouching that's needed be lessened a lot. And so in this particular case, I see one little weird spot in the grass. I'd usually have to be zoomed up, though, to really know if it's weird. Shift-Delete, Return. See if it can fix that. Some other things, and it's mainly over here where we have very precise detail where it did weird stuff, and that's where I'll probably have to manually retouch that, because I doubt it's going to do too bad. But usually it's one of those things, there's so many features in Photoshop where I think of 3 strikes and you're out, which is give it 3 chances. And then quit trying and do it manually, if that makes any sense. So now that I've done that, before I'd really start retouching all that stuff, though, fixing where it messed up, I'd crop the image. Because just make sure you got your ideal crop, whatever that happens to be. And it might be that I don't even need to fix that, because I ended up cropping out that part that was an issue. So otherwise, I find if I don't think that way, I end up spending a lot of time fixing a really hard area, and it doesn't even end up in the end result. So. Any questions about the technique? Yeah.
If you expanded your image so that it's white, would it still work the same way?
If the area was full of white instead of looking like a checkerboard?
Right, because you expanded your basic image.
Oh, like you did a canvas size is one thing, or used the crop tool and you just added space.
Yes.
So let's find an image, especially if you have a sky. Skies work great. I have an image like this, and a magazine said, hey, we want to use that. And I'm like, a magazine? You don't want to use it on the cover. And you're like, well, in order to use that on the cover, colors are vertical, right? So that's not going to look so good. But that's the image they want to use. So I'll zoom out on the picture, and I'll say, fine, let's crop it this way. That'll be a ridiculous amount of space to fill, but we can see. I do the same technique. In this case, I can just use the magic wand because it's one big expanse that's rectangular. I do want to expand it by 1 pixel, and then Shift, Delete, Return. And let's see what it does. I have no idea in this case. That's a huge space, so I doubt it's going to do a great job, but you never know. But if that was a small amount, let's say I doubled the amount of space above the amount of sky above the building that's here, it would most likely do fine. And that doesn't have to be a checkerboard. It can be white. Okay? But look at what it just did. It's a little too patterned. But to show you that it'll work with white, let me come in here and crop this so it's more realistic. And I will flatten which should fill that with white. And then I could use the magic wand tool if I wanted. In this case, I'll just use the marquee tool, and I'll make sure it overlaps the original a little bit. So Shift, Delete, return. Okay. But the problem is so many people only look at their images in fit-in window view. And they think, oh, it looks great, let's just close that, save it, and do whatever. If it's for the internet, that's fine. Other people are going to be seeing it in the same view, small. But if you're going to be printing it, be critical of what it did. That means zoom up and make sure it really looks right. Like, I don't know if that looks right or not. And if it doesn't, select the area, make your selection overlap some of the surrounding, Shift, Delete, return, and see if it can do better there. And then move over and see, is there any other area? I can see something right there. I don't know what it is. It feels like a line. Shouldn't be a line in my sky. So I might just go over here. I should have a little extra on there because I didn't mean to go up. Okay, Shift, Delete, return. And just continue looking and being critical of it. And whatever you think, like here, do you see repeat, repeat, repeat shape? Can you see that kind of feels like three very similar things? So go in there. Shift, Delete, return. Now it still looks somewhat similar. I'll tackle the other one. Sometimes I end up retouching the area that's not where it filled in. Instead, it's the area where it looks like it copied from, or generated that from. And maybe it still bugs me because this looks like the one up at the top. And now that just copied from what's up here. So sometimes if it does that, and I try it more than once and it seems to do that, I'll try to incorporate both of the things. You know, like if, let me choose undo. Okay, if it was this, what I might do is select this, hold Shift to say I want to select more, and this. To say, no, you can't copy from over there because I'm telling you to get rid of that thing you've been copying from. So Shift, Delete, return. And, you know, see what it comes up with. So I'll give you some ideas as far as, you know, if it seems to have like a fixation on a particular part of your image, go tell it to retouch that out as well. Yeah. So yeah, we can add space like that.